I'm Layla.
And I'm Miranda.
And we're Quills
And Caffeine.
Welcome back. It's Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Or well, it will be Tuesday.
It will be. Tomorrow. Excellent synchronicity.
Yes.
Anyway.
What are we talking about today, Ryan?
Well, today we thought we would veer off from talking about our stuff and talk about someone else's stuff. So we're talking yeah, so we're talking about Twilight. Which is pretty difficult. But we have good reason. So
Well,
we
yeah.
do. Okay, so everyone has talked about Twilight. Let's be real. Everyone talks about how terrible the characters are, how abusive Edward is, how the relationships all suck, etc., etc., etc. But we have other reasons that we want to talk about Twilight.
Yes. So it's been done, but we're doing it better. And the reason why we are talking about this now instead of like 5 years ago or 10 years ago like everyone else is because we just watched all of Twilight.
Or rather, I rewatched all of Twilight.
And I watched with her, so we rewatched Twilight. Mostly for shits and giggles, but then it became like, let's deconstruct the world building so that we don't do the same thing.
Because that's what we do. We sit there and critique everything that we watch. So
It's unending.
Yep.
It never stops.
Right. So yeah, we both have like completely different experiences with Twilight. Twilight came out at like the perfect time for me. I was in high school. I was very sad and depressed. And I needed something to cling to that would take me out of my miserable life. So I read Twilight and I was like, this is the thing for me. So I read the whole series. I went to the Breaking Dawn midnight book premiere. Or book release. I know, Layla. I know. And I even got my mom into the movies. And then I realized I hated Twilight after, like, New Moon came out. And then my mom got really bitter because she was like, you got me into these and now you won't go see them with me in the theaters. It's like, no, Mom, they're terrible! Where is Layla?
I read half of the book, and I was like, this is terrible. And then that Halloween, my friends were like, let's watch Twilight! And I was like, no. And they still made me watch it. And I watched half the movie and fell asleep. That was it. Until like 2 weeks ago.
Also, we didn't even watch all of them. We just skipped New Moon.
Skip New Moon.
We're like, fuck that. We're not watching that.
We're not watching New Moon. It's bullshit. No. It's gazebo.
Anyway.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so I had no idea what I was getting into, and we watched them, and Rin just started spouting all this lore. I was like,
because I remember all of this.
you're heathen.
Hey.
Let's get into why it's actually bad, though,
Yeah.
instead of just hating
And,
it.
like, why I still sometimes feel like defending it, but not a lot.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
By the end, I was genuinely a little invested. But
Yeah.
in everyone except Bella and Edward.
Yeah, and that was when I think we started realizing what the big problem was.
Yeah.
We realized there was so much wasted potential in Twilight. There is actually a lot of good stuff in there. Like, there are really fascinating characters, aside from the main characters, which is the big problem. There's some good world building in there. You know, there's just all of this stuff that could have gone somewhere really good. But Stephanie Meyer was so concentrated on her stupid love story that she didn't realize it.
So first of all, the characters. Every single character is better than Bella and Edward.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem
That is a
when
huge
you write a romance or any book in general. Like, that's a... Number one rule is to make your character the most likable, most, like, relatable, like, interesting, etc.
Not even necessarily that, but just don't make them pale so much in comparison with everyone else.
Pale!
Oh my god! Anyway. But yeah, because I remember watching all these critiques of Twilight, and a ton of people say that, like, they'll hear about Carlisle's history and be like, that is way cooler than anything Edward ever did. Like, Carlisle was bitten by a coven of vampires back in the 1600s, hid in the sewers, tried to kill himself several times because of what he had become. He had to deal with being a vampire all on his own, and figured out the vegetarian thing all on his own, and all this stuff. And then he became this great doctor, and all this shit. And Edward almost died of the Spanish influenza. That's his backstory.
Yeah, like, he has the most boring backstory, which to me, backstory in a character is hugely important, because that's what I build the rest of my character up off of. But Edward didn't do anything. He had that little moment where he was like, I'm a cool vigilante, and then they dropped it and never, like, brought it up again.
And that wasn't even...
weird.
Yeah, and that wasn't even brought up until the last book.
Right.
Like,
That was the very, very last, like, good bit of character building for Edward. The only other good trait I can think of for Edward is that he plays the piano, and he does that twice.
And also, that's not even a good trait, because I feel like that's just classic, you know, grumpy,
like,
angsty
suave,
boy. Yeah.
rich boy. I play the piano, I'm classically trained.
I play the piano, does that make me cool? I'm just saying.
Do you like me yet, Bella?
I mean, he did write her a song. That would make me swoon, to be honest.
But that just makes me think that if Edward was more caught up on the times, he'd be on SoundCloud. I don't know.
You're not wrong.
And then you have Bella, who doesn't have a backstory at all. Like, she's, what, 16 when the book series starts?
16, 17,
16, 17. She's too young to have a backstory, which is, like, fine. You can have character protagonists that don't have a tragic backstory.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't come from anything that made her significant.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was nowhere to go for her other than limp. She's like a noodle. Anyway.
Well, okay. Well, and people talk about Bella being a blank slate, which I think is totally true. But Stephanie Meyer could have done something with that.
Yeah.
Made her an interesting character. Because she did start off as this totally normal, average girl, and she remained a totally normal, average girl. And then she was bitten and became a vampire. And then she was still a totally normal girl. Like, in personality.
I think she had a line in, Eclipse? The third one, I think, where she was like, I'm stronger now. I've had to deal with death, and I've had to deal with all this, and, like, I'm a different person now, and it would have been cool to see that, you know? Like, it would have been cool to see her progress, versus just saying, like, I'm different now, and then being exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. Makes me so angry. Also, can we talk about Alice? Alice has the coolest freaking backstory of any of the characters. She was in an asylum. She got bitten by a vampire. Her mother was murdered. She saw a vision of her mother's murder. And then she just like was bitten and just like wandered off into the ether and just waited for Jasper. Because she knew that she was gonna find him.
Right.
And she was like...
Alice and Jasper would have been an adorable love story, and I would have so much rather heard about them than the love triangle that didn't really work out that great.
Also, Jacob deserves better than Bella. But only up until New Moon. In Eclipse, he kind of got shit. But...
I liked Jacob when he had long hair.
Yeah.
It's like he cut his hair and lost all his power, like that guy from the Bible.
Samson.
He's Samson.
He's Samson. Right.
That's the title. Jacob is Samson. Yeah, there's that. I guess another thing that we could touch on is that the world building is actually really good. Which surprised me a lot, because it, like, on a surface level, it doesn't seem like it would be anything. Like, oh, vampires versus werewolves, that's been done. But it has been done because Stephanie Meyer did it first. You know, like, it's like when people call Lord of the Rings typical fantasy, because it invented fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, it was good world building, and it inspired a lot of other fiction that's much better. It's just, again, wasted potential with the world building.
Well, and the thing with the world building, too, is that it's consistent. For the most part. Like, there are, flubs here and there. But the world building is consistent. It's contained, so it's not a lot, but it works for the story that she created. But you can see that there's so much potential for more world building. Like, for example, I told Layla about this briefly. The novel, I can't remember what the novel is called off the top of my head now, but it's the one, no. No. It's the one-off book that she wrote about one of the vampires in Eclipse from the, like, new vampire army that Victoria created, Bree. And so,
the, like, child.
Yeah, so she wrote this novel about Bree, and it was really interesting. Like, I was not super interested in Twilight by the time that novel came out, but I was like, it'd be really interesting just to see what she does with this. So I read it anyway. And it was. Like, it had all this stuff about what it was like to live with a whole slew of new vampires who were all really tempestuous and angry and hungry constantly and always at each other's throats and just everything like that.
Just angsty.
Yeah, and
Is
it
that
was
a vampire
so
pun?
It wasn't, but then I thought about it afterwards. Yeah. So it might as well be.
Vampire pun. Anyway.
But
yeah. It's just basically Twilight could have been better if it wasn't Twilight.
Twilight could have been better if it was handled by someone who was not Stephanie Meyer, or if she had realized the potential in her other characters and decided to write them instead.
Another thing that's really important to any book series, and I'm sure this will not be a shock to most of you, having a good plot is important.
Yes.
Unpopular opinion. Plot makes up a lot of your book. She doesn't have a good plot. Like...
See, the thing is, she does have elements of good plots.
Yeah,
but she has so much crap in the middle of her books.
Oh, yes.
It's like nothing happens. And then suddenly stuff happens.
Stuff happens and then it ends.
Yeah, in like the last quarter of the book.
Yeah. Well, okay. I especially felt this with the first one. Nothing happened. I only watched the movies. I haven't read the books. Full disclaimer. But in the movie, nothing happens for an hour and 20 minutes.
Which is actually really accurate to the book, so it's fine.
Yeah, and then the last 40-ish minutes is the whole thing with the, what's his face? The bad guy.
James.
James?
Yeah.
It's James?
Yeah, in the first movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, James.
The tracker vampire who finds her in the Valley Studio. That's James.
James. All the bad stuff happens with James. Here versus here. Here. I can't see. No. And it's frustrating because I can totally see where she could have worked in other stuff. You could have really developed James into a very, like, intimidating bad guy, but it just didn't happen because she was so focused on the love story that she didn't think to include the villain. It's like she wrote 3/4, realized nothing was happening, threw in a bad guy, called it good.
Yeah. And you can write a love story that doesn't have an antagonist, especially, one like James. But I feel like she felt as if she had to have one because it was a vampire story. But she didn't think about that ahead of time because all she cared about was the romance.
It's true.
Think about your characters. When you're creating your characters, think about if there are some that are speaking to you more than the others. Evaluate why, and evaluate how they compare to your background characters. And, that sort of thing. Because I think that is really important. If your background characters are more interesting or they read more interesting to people than your main characters, that is a problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Your main characters have to carry the story.
And if they can't, maybe they shouldn't be the main character.
Or maybe you should revise your characters. Make them better.
Make them interesting.
Don't make them empty shells of people who have no development, do not grow through the entire series, and are just plain ass boring.
Yes.
That is all of the problems that we have with those are all of the problems that we have with Twilight that have nothing to do with the fact that Edward is an abusive asshole and everything sucks. So, just has a lot of wasted potential.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
So yes.
Like and subscribe for more content.
Follow our Instagram. We're cool.
We are cool. We'll be back on Tuesday.
I feel like this is a very effective
quills and caffeine. And now we have a theme song.